All right, folks, welcome to the podcast. My name's John Thomas Hill, and as you're probably all aware, Donald Trump did not have a good Friday yesterday. The American Health Care Act, which he proposed to replace Obamacare, otherwise known as the Affordable Care Act, about that, it didn't even go to a vote because Paul Ryan, the Speaker of the House, knew that he didn't have the votes to get the act passed in the House. Whether or not it would have passed the Senate, it looked like it was not going to pass the Senate anyway. There's a lot of conservative opposition, especially from the Tea Party, who think it doesn't go far enough to repeal some of the things that Obamacare had in it. Obviously, those that believed in Obamacare are glad that this happened, but also are realistic knowing that that it will be back. Now, this is the problem with the Trump administration. They don't understand that you have to get Congress to go along with you by convincing them to go along with you. Not by brute force, not by telling them, as Steve Bannon, one of the chief advisors for Trump, allegedly did, was basically tell him, you have no choice, you have to vote for this act. And when you tell congressmen that, they tend to say, oh, really now? So the problem is that they don't understand is that Trump doesn't know how to basically apply the carrot and the stick like you should in Congress. And he doesn't really have a whole lot of people that have experience on how to deal with Congress. And so that's a big problem for him, and that's something he's got to realize, that unless he's willing to change that, he's in trouble. Now, let me first of all basically tell you that I'm not really going to go into any detail about the breakdowns, about the policy and such, because you've heard it all before, I'm sure. You can easily look it up. What I will tell you is that most people don't like being forced to have health insurance. That's been the main problem with a lot of folks about Obamacare. And the fact that if you don't have health insurance, you have to pay a pretty significant penalty. And if that were taken away, which I thought was going to happen, I thought the Supreme Court was going to strike down the individual mandate. Apparently, that's kosher with the Supreme Court. So it's managed to survive, surprisingly enough, to the Supreme Court process. And in many ways, I think that's actually done Obamacare more harm than good, because, yeah, there's a reason why they had the individual mandate, which was to get as many people in the group as possible so that the cost would be spread out over people. Here's the thing people don't understand about health insurance. There are people who go, well, I don't want to pay for somebody's such and such surgery. You're already paying for it if you have health insurance. You're paying for somebody else's, because health insurance is a group policy. If you buy your health insurance through where you work at, congratulations, you're already paying for somebody else's surgery. And they're paying for yours, if you happen to have one. It's part of the system. And when you have that, it means that the costs are spread out, and that basically, in case you can't pay what you owe, remainder the insurance company can make up for it, because they're the ones that are on the dock for this. So, and they've already decided how much they're willing to pay. Now you've got to pay your part of it. It's one of those things that most people don't realize about health insurance, is that you're not paying health insurance for yourself. You're paying into a pool where you will get the benefits of that according to your policy. And if you've noticed, as I have in recent decades, you're paying more for less, essentially. Back when I was a little kid, my mom had really good health insurance, even though she worked a pretty measly job in a place where she was making a pretty decent wage, but not anything that I would consider. You know, we were not rolling in dough, to say the least. But health care wise, health insurance was affordable. But as time wore on, and I've noticed through many other people and such that, and especially in my working years, is that health insurance tends to be where you get less and pay more. The deductibles have gone up, the cost have gone up. And that's a big problem for a lot of people. They're like, why in the world am I paying more for less? And I have to have it. So it's one of those deals that there's a sense, well, they want to have competition. They want to allow for insurance companies to cross state lines and such. Well, that's the problem, though, is that if that's the case, then the companies will simply go for the cheapest coverage that won't really cover you that much at all. It's like with car insurance. You can get minimized car insurance, and nobody will. And if you get in an accident, you may be up the creek, especially if you're at fault. Same deal with health insurance. If you buy the minimum coverage of health insurance, you're gonna have a huge deductible that you may not meet. And even if you do meet it, how much is it actually going to help you pay out? So there is that. So all the individual mandate says is that you either buy a health insurance plan or you pay a penalty. The health insurance plan, unfortunately, the marketplace has done pretty well for itself. The problem, of course, is that as the health insurance industry has adapted to live under Obamacare, they found ways to exploit it. This is the problem. The healthcare industry doesn't really want Obamacare, but they also really don't want to be out of business either, which is what a lot of folks who want single payer would love to do, is to get rid of for-profit healthcare companies and the whole health insurance industry. Because in many ways, it's been a burden on the American public. First of all, it means that surgeries that would cost a lot less in countries such as Canada, Australia, parts of Europe, are far more expensive here. The same goes with prescription drugs. So if you're sick in the United States, you're in trouble. You're going to be, and a lot of folks say, well, you can get charity help and such, but that's not always the case, and you have to constantly reapply for that. And it's one of those deals that, in general, people would rather not have to do constantly, is worrying about whether or not they have to reapply for the coverage that they need. It kind of sucks in many ways. And there are people say, well, the whole point is we shouldn't give away free health care and such. People want free. That's not the point. The point of the Affordable Care Act is to make health care affordable, not free necessarily, unless you're just simply so poor and so needy for it that you have no other options. It's not the Free Health Care Act, it's the Affordable Health Care Act. And it's not perfect, far from it. It was the start of something to make the American healthcare system more affordable for the average American, to where you're not having to declare bankruptcy in order to, if you should have a life-threatening situation such as getting cancer or having a heart attack or having a stroke or being involved in an automobile accident and having to go through multiple surgeries or whatnot. That's the thing that people don't understand about the Affordable Health Care Act. It's not free. It just makes it affordable to some who are really, really desperate and poor. Yeah, it probably is free, but they're covered under Medicare and Medicaid anyway. And the expansion has helped a lot of people. But unfortunately, there's been a lot of misinformation because the healthcare industry doesn't like any of this because they see their risk of their profits. And that's the problem, is that we're not seeing the big picture. We're the only industrialized nation not to have nationalized healthcare to a certain extent. Medicare and Medicaid don't count because most working age people are not eligible for that. So here's the deal with the Affordable Care Act. It needs to be reformed. Medicaid, Medicare need to be expanded. And I'm all fine with not having Planned Parenthood fund abortions as long as women are able to get adequate coverage for female health issues like pap smears and whatnot. But unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation because a lot of those services Planned Parenthood offers, private health insurance offers, private health care companies offer, and they don't want you to go to the competition, which is Planned Parenthood. So they are misinforming you, saying that, well, Planned Parenthood is using this money to fund abortions. They're not. They're federally mandated against providing abortions with federal money. So, yeah. And I got some cats here that are not exactly in a pleasant mood, if you're wondering about the hissing and such. There's a mama cat around that's not in the most pleasant of moods right now, so. But I digress. Here's the deal. The Affordable Care Act has to be reformed. It should not be fully repealed. It should be reformed. The individual mandate should be taken away, or at the very least, have the penalties lessened and have an exemption for people who simply don't make enough for it. And allow them to get on Medicare, Medicaid. Or maybe even put them on there automatically if they so choose, if they so desire. Now, the biggest problem with the way Trump approached this whole thing was the fact that he just assumed that the Republicans would go along with this. There's a pattern developing in the Trump administration in that they believe that if Trump says it, it has to go. You have to do what Trump tells you. That may hold true in the executive branch to a certain degree, although, truth be told, the president isn't as powerful even in his own branch as he would like to be. You can't tell Congress what to do. The president can't tell Congress what to do. He can suggest, he can cajole them, he can yell and scream and threaten to cut funding to political campaigns for congressmen and women and whatnot. But the biggest problem is he cannot tell a Congress to pass a bill or else, because they're going to go, well, we'll see about that. Now, it's interesting that Donald Trump blamed the Democrats for this, saying that they should have helped him out. First of all, he's not exactly been that friendly with the Democrats. He's not exactly been asking for Democratic help with this, okay? So, the Democrats don't control either house of Congress. The Republicans have enough to pass this bill, yet they couldn't pass it because you had the Tea Party and their minions against it because it didn't go far enough. That's my phone, by the way, folks. And it is what it is. And it's amazing that Trump didn't think of this. It really is, because you would think that someone on his staff would have been political savvy enough to go, well, you gotta give and take. You gotta know where to compromise, know where to give in, know where to ask them to give in, blah, 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 blah. So the negotiator isn't really that good at the political end of negotiating. And this is the problem that Trump faces. Business negotiating is not the same as political negotiating. And that's the mistake he's been making. Political negotiations are not the same. Now, when we talk about political negotiations, we talk about basically wheeling and dealing. You scratch my back, I scratch yours. It's the stuff that most people don't like. Most people want Congress to simply propose legislation, have an up and down vote, and send it on to the Senate to do the same thing, and if that happens to the president likes it, he signs it. If the president doesn't like it, he vetoes it, goes back to Congress. They can have 2/3 to override it. If they override it on both houses by 2/3 majority, it passes anyway. If it doesn't, well, Congress is out of luck. The problem is Trump cannot get past the fact that he is not the true leader of his party. There's really no one leader of the Republican Party right now. There are leaders, but not a leader of the party. Paul Ryan sees himself as the leader of the Republican Party. I firmly believe he doesn't think Donald Trump is really a Republican. I think Paul Ryan believes Donald Trump has to be have this kind of rude awakening, knowing you got to go further to the right in order to get this passed. And Donald Trump, to him at least, isn't far enough right, even though he gave his word, he supported it. But the reality is, Paul Ryan should have been the one to get this passed. More importantly, it should have been the majority leader and the whips who should have gotten this through. That's the problem. Trump doesn't have a good relationship with the leadership in the House of the Republican side. And the longer this goes on, the more it reminds me of how Carter and the Democratic leadership in the House and Senate didn't like one another. We had another outsider candidate come into Washington who was going to fix things that were supposedly bad, although back then they were bad because we had just had Watergate. So, yeah, Barack Obama didn't have a Watergate. Hate to break it to some of you conservative folks, but Barack Obama didn't have any scandals really at all. There was that little Fast and the Furious thing, but that was really not much on him anyway. And there was Benghazi, but that was more or less that's one of those situations where if you went after a president for that, you'd have to go George W. Bush for the 8 times it happened under his administration, and before that, Clinton, and embassies have gotten attacked during presidential terms. There will probably be an embassy attack soon enough for Donald Trump to worry about, and there may even be people who get killed during all of that. So that is something to keep an eye on for. So yeah, it's it's a very interesting situation where we find ourselves in that we're looking at this president who simply cannot get his ducks in a row with the very people that he should be having a very good relationship with. The problem is, politicians have a long memory. There are bills that are coming due that happened last year when the very people that are saying, hey, they're supporting Trump now, were on the anti-Trump side. And those who were kind of on the fence. Remember, Paul Ryan initially kind of held back when Trump looked to be the official nominee. And it's one of those situations where there's a lot more infighting going on in the Republican Party than we even know about. I'm sure that in the halls of Congress there are people who are going, how the hell did we let this guy become president? And this is the problem when you vote an anti-establishment president in, because the problem is, yeah, you vote an anti-establishment president in, but the establishment Congress is still in there. This is what happened in '76 when you had Carter jump in, who was not necessarily an traditional establishment Democrat. He got the nomination. He won the presidency. He's an anti-establishment Democrat. He's going to Congress and trying to get what he wants. And they're going, well, you got to play by our rules, or you don't get nothing. So yeah, Carter basically lost his presidency because he couldn't get stuff done. That was the main part of it. He was ineffective. Trump is showing to be ineffective as well. And this was a huge, huge blow for him. Now let's talk about the Russia situation. I know a lot of you folks are tired of it, but there is a lot of smoke here, and there's a lot of fire, I'm afraid. How much of it gets back to Trump? That's what worries me. Paul Manafort, his former campaign director before Kelly Conway took the job, now they're saying that he had no real contact with Trump, or he didn't have a whole lot of control over the campaign. This is the campaign manager, the guy running the campaign, and you're saying he didn't have that much control over it? Then why is he campaign manager? Who had control? So that makes them look bad. They had 3 campaign managers in the space of a year. Corey Lewandowski, Paul Manafort, and Kellyanne Conway. How he won is still going to be studied for decades to come, because by all intents and purposes, he should not have won that election at all, but he managed to win because Clinton didn't do a good enough job with the very people that really wanted her to respond to her. Excuse me for a moment. Need a little drink there. But she didn't respond good enough. And this is the problem and yeah, there's the whole thing about, did Russia actually influence the election enough to cause Trump to win? The answer is, we don't know. Did they? I really couldn't tell you. My gut tells me that in the end, they really didn't have a whole lot to do with it. But the fact that they tried, and the fact that the Trump campaign may have had information, or may have been coordinating with him, or may have actually been working with him directly, that's troubling. Even if it didn't cost her the election, it still means that a foreign government sought to influence a presidential election in this country. And that's troubling. And the fact that Trump is constantly saying that it's all Democrats are just crying about the election, then why is there so much evidence supporting this? Why is he not cooperating? Why is he not opening it, going, okay, go ahead, go find something. Here you go. I'll give you my files. You search through them. Here you go. You want to get a subpoena? Go right ahead. We'll fully cooperate. I have nothing to hide. That's what he should be saying. I have nothing to hide. Throw the books open, let him look. Why is he hiding his tax returns? He is the first president in over 40 years to not release his tax returns. The one that didn't before him was Richard Nixon. And he had a good reason not to. Because he was into some shenanigans he didn't want the American people to know about. Every other president since Nixon, until now, has done that. Both Republicans and Democrats. He's the only one that hasn't done it in 40 years. So the question beckons, what's he hiding? Why not? Oh, he's got business things he don't want his competition up. Well, that's tough. You run for president of the United States. You ought to know what you're getting yourself into. And this is the problem. I don't think Trump really realized what he was getting himself into when he ran for the job. Now, to be honest, no president really fully understands the job until they take the oath of office and actually are in charge. I don't care how close you are to the presidency. You know, unless you've actually been president, you don't know what it's like to be president. Don't know what it's like to make the decisions a president makes. But at the same time, senators deal with presidents every day. They deal with the presidential staff. They've been around the president. They know how to work. Same with Congress, same with governors. Governors know how to deal with presidents. They know how to deal with the federal government. They know how to deal with the state government. They know how to do a budget and all this. And, well, Trump does it. Trump did it for his business. That's the problem. Businesses are about profits. Government is not about profit. It's about providing services that individuals or small groups can't do on their own, like paving roads. So, and you've not heard much about that infrastructure thing, have you? Not lately. Which, if Trump was smart, he would back away from the healthcare thing and go, you know what? Let's work on something that we can get some bipartisanship going, and that's this infrastructure deal. And kind of smooth things over with, at the very least, his Republican colleagues in the House and Senate. And that's what he's really got to look for. Bannon wants to take names and put a list of bad people, a bad guys list. Or I don't want to call it what most people call it because there's an expletive in it. Refers to poop, but let's just call it poop list, for lack of a better term. And the problem with that is that tends to backfire. Let's say you're going to go, well, we're going to go out with this congressman because he did want to vote for our health care bill. But let's say that congressman's a Tea Party Tea Party congressperson. That means you're going up against people that already have plenty of money invested in this guy. And they're going to go, do we stick with the congressman who's been with us and voted our way most of the time, or do we want to go with the president who's only been there and who's pretty much not listened to anybody, much less us? So, yeah. There could be a rude awakening there in this whole thing about, well, we're going to take revenge on people who didn't vote our way, who were not going to vote our way. Well, so really pulling it doesn't really help them at all, because it's pretty much, it may have softened the blow of having to go before Congress and put this bill up there and having it getting voted down. This essentially allows for the possibility of amendments to be passed to where it becomes more palatable to those Republicans who are going to vote no on it, which There's going to be a lot of work done on it. I don't think you're going to hear much about health care reform until either the end of the year or first of next year, when Trump is going to try to use that as an election year ploy to try to bring Republicans around to his side. And that would require him to become popular. If I'm Trump, first of all, I would start hoping that this whole Russia thing goes away by actually hoping there's evidence showing that he didn't have anything to be involved with it. Which I'm wondering if there is anything that doesn't show him being involved with it, because it looks pretty bad, folks. It really does. And it's starting to scare me, frankly. Is that how much do we not know about this? Is this a true? Because you got to remember, Watergate didn't really get started until 73. And it was almost a year after the break-ins that it really started rolling. And most people thought, well, Nixon's not really that involved. There's some bad stuff that went on, but it was not him directly involved in it until later on when we started finding out that, yeah, he had a lot involved with it. So, anyhow, that's what worries me. So, now what can Trump do to kind of change the tide, so to speak? Well, first of all, the budget battle, he has to realize he's going to have to give in. He's going to have to give back, allow funding for Corporation for Public Broadcasting and all the other stuff he cut, which basically is a big bone. It's pennies, basically, for the government. It's funding the humanities and arts and such like that. That's nothing, folks. That's literally for how much you pay in taxes for a year. You're literally paying nothing, practically next to nothing for it. It's like at most you're paying $1 or $2 for a year. So you're at what, a soda? And hell, I'll take it up for you. You don't want to pay for public broadcasting? I'll double my contribution for it. I'm not a big consumer of public broadcasting, but I recognize its worth to the public. And that's the problem, is that folks don't realize just how much. There are a lot of people who probably think, oh, it's a good idea to cut Corporation for Public Broadcasting. They think, well, WNCW down here has been able to be just fine. That's where a lot of their funding comes from. Okay? So, yeah. You might want to do a little research before you jump on the bandwagon. And it's this whole thing about, well, we shouldn't pay for PBS because supposedly they aren't telling the truth. Their viewpoints slanted. It's because of the Frontline program. Mainly because Frontline has a habit of investigating things that certain people with lots of money on the Republican side don't necessarily want to see. You know. But I have a feeling that the funding will be back for all of that, because that's a traditional. Bush tried the same thing. It didn't have. And the whole Meals on Wheels thing, yes, most Meals on Wheels funding is still going to be available, but this is a trend. If they cut it at this level, who say states wouldn't cut it and go, well, we don't really need to pay for this. Well, guess what? You do. It looks really, really bad. Trust me, that's coming out of the budget bill. Right there. So, yeah, Trump's going to have a very, very difficult time ahead. And I hate to tell him that, it's going to be a long, long road to hoe. But if he's able to give in on the budget, yes, he's probably going to have to spend more than he actually wants to spend. There'll probably be some tax increases to make up for the fact that some of the domestic cuts he wanted will not be passed, because a lot of Republicans will catch a lot of heat for it. But if he gives in and kind of goes, okay, we'll bite the bullet, we'll pare back defense spending, because let's face it, folks, we are spending 3 times with this budget increase more than China's spending. China's spending 200 some odd billion dollars a year on defense. We're spending 600 and some odd billion dollars. We're spending 3 times more than China is. Russia spends like $82 billion. So we're spending combined twice as much as China and Russia, the two biggest superpowers combined. And we're still having to boost our defense spending? Nobody's asking the obvious question is, why do we need to continue to boost spending? Why is this not enough? So, and yet we continue here, VA, the veterans are still being screwed over by the VA. Our service personnel are still having problems with getting their benefits and such. So it makes me wonder who's really reaping the benefits of the defense budget. So, but let's talk about the infrastructure deal. This is something that could help Trump gain some popularity, is if he goes before the people with a infrastructure bill that will put a lot of projects that are needing to be done on a priority basis. If that happens, ladies and gentlemen, what happens is that people start seeing the money pour in. They start seeing the stuff happening on their highways. They start seeing the economy improve there. That's really what the first thing that Donald Trump should have done is say, look, we need to build. That's really what he should have campaigned on, frankly, is infrastructure. Infrastructure, trade, jobs. That was what he should have campaigned on. Forget this whole thing about the wall. Let me be perfectly frank here. Immigration is not taking your jobs. It's automation in many ways. Yes, you see, there's another plant in Indiana that's sending jobs to Mexico. Well, if it's so prosperous in Mexico, why are Mexicans coming up here to make a better living? Because that's NAFTA. But we can't just simply get out of NAFTA because it would hurt both economies. And when you hurt both economies, long term, it's going to result in Donald Trump losing even more. And that's something that, if I'm Donald Trump, I worry about, because if it gets bad enough, folks, Trump could lose big time in 2020. And I'm not talking about the general election, I'm talking about the primary election. And that's what I think may be the key, is that there are a lot of congressional Republicans who are going, we don't really like the guy, but we're stuck with him for 4 years. Unless there's something really, 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 really bad in the whole Russia thing, or he does something really stupid to cause Congress a Republican-led Congress to actually impeach and convict him and remove him from office. They're stuck with him for 4 years. And the problem is, how do they get rid of him without causing greater harm to the party? Here's what I think is going to happen. The Republican Party knows that Trump's a liability. They know it right now. They knew it going into the election. There are plenty of people probably shocked Trump actually won the election. So there was not just Democrats shocked that Trump won the election. A lot of Republicans were as well. And not necessarily in a good way either. Because I know some Republicans who saw this coming. Who thought that, well, if Trump works within the system, he might be a good president, but we're seeing that he is who he said he was during the presidential campaign, and that's a problem because a lot of congressional Republicans don't like that. They like to have a president that works with them and not just says, "This is my budget, pass it." So that is a situation. Well, let me go ahead and wrap this up by going back to the problem with Trump. Here are the main problems with Trump. First of all, he does not have a staff that knows how to run a White House in a way that the media has accessibility, thus the people have accessibility. And their problem is they think, well, if we just tell people what we're doing, then they'll be okay with it. The problem is that that's just your side of the story. Every president and his administration has wanted to tell just their side of the story. But they understand that the press has to do their job to hold the president accountable. Because there are a lot of people that work in the White House. And there's a lot of powerful people around the president. And there are a lot of people around the president who have their own little empires, their little fiefdoms, their little agendas, whatnot. And they like making sure that their main goals aren't interfered with. So yeah, the president's getting played like every other president's getting played. They got played by their staff. There are people, Bannon's one of them, who wants his agenda. And I worry about this guy because I think Reince Priebus, his chief of staff, is a complete loser because he didn't really want Trump to be president. And the only reason he jumped onto it was trying to save face. And I think he's realizing that he's probably going to be, he's on the political version of the Titanic. Here's my thing. You have a lot of people who think they know what they're doing, but they really don't. They don't have the savvy that hardened Washington establishment politicians have about getting stuff done. They don't know that, yeah, you have to grease the wheel. The American people understand that there's always going to be some corruption in government. There's always going to be some greasing of the hands, some pork in the legislation. They're okay to a certain extent of it. It's just that it gets way too much. That's when they holler. But as we've seen, it's getting even worse. So yeah, it's a situation right now, ladies and gentlemen, that most Americans are tired of they're tired of politics as usual. The only problem is the politics we're seeing now is not what they want. That's why you see Donald Trump with such record low approval ratings. Now, can he turn them around? Of course. But he's got to do a lot of work, and it's going to take a lot of, basically, Donald Trump relearning the wheel, so to speak, going, okay, how do I actually do this job? How do I actually be a president? How do I actually work with Congress as a president to get what I want passed? Because if he doesn't, he is going to be the Republican version of Jimmy Carter. Massively unpopular, of the Congress of his own party that hates his guts, and there may very well be a Democratic version of a Ronald Reagan waiting in the wings. Who knows? The second problem with Donald Trump is transparency. There are some conservatives who, when Donald Trump says fake news, they'll go, yeah, boy, you can't trust the media. That can only work so long until you start hearing that conservative news websites are starting to turn against the president. Drudge was critical when the health care bill didn't pass. It always starts with something small. That's how it usually goes. And we're seeing it now in that right now Donald Trump is facing a test of how do you appease the media? How do you might not trust the media, but you don't trust a lot of people in politics anyway. But you still have to deal with them. The fact that his Secretary of State went on a trip to China and only took one reporter from a conservative-leaning news website, instead of a traditional media website, that's a problem. So in that essence, what we are seeing, ladies and gentlemen, is a major concern, a major problem. And it's something that we as a nation have to be ready for, because we are, and I hate to say it, we are in a very difficult and dangerous situation. So that is a very critical thing that I think we all have to be aware of. Because if we're not aware of it, what happens is that it will cause us to potentially fail as a nation. And there's a third thing: foreign relations. North Korea is starting to get antsy. We saw all through the Bush administration, we saw all through the Obama years, even through Clinton, even through George Herbert Walker Bush. So in that aspect, let's not forget that there is going to be a problem with, forgive me for a moment there, something I had to look up for just a second. But the problem with North Korea is that it would not take much for North Korea to get China involved in war. Kim Jong-un is a nut. He's insane. And the people, the whole government in China is basically knowing that they've got the United States in a sense in the corner, because if North Korea were to attack Japan and South Korea, how would we respond without provoking China to interfere? That's the $64,000 question. If let's say North Korea were to attack Seoul or Tokyo or any other South Korean or Japanese city, or let's say they were to attack Guam or any other American islands in the West Pacific, or potentially even Hawaii, how would we respond? Let's say they do it with nuclear weapons. Do we respond in kind? Do we show restraint but still attack with a conventional bombing attack? How do we respond? This is the problem when you have someone who may be a bit of a hothead. This was a concern of McCain in 2008, because there were some people, even conservatives, who were worried. It was McCain. Did McCain have the temperament that if he were pressed to a situation like that, would he remain calm and be able to think things through? Or would he just go, screw it, press the button, launch the nukes, and there goes the neighborhood? Kim Jong, here's what I would do if I were president. I would be working with China to eventually remove Kim Jong-un. Not replacing it with a democratic government or anything like that, but basically a government that China essentially controls, but is essentially like China East. China with a Korean accent basically, and Korean writing. It would basically allow for a formal end to the Korean War. It would mean that North and South Korea could have formal relations, and that China would force North Korea to basically give up the prospect of unification with South Korea, at least through military force. Any kind of unification would have to be peaceful. So there should be some wheeling and dealing going on, and I think that if I had to fault Obama for one thing, it's that he didn't do enough to convince China to help get rid of Kim Il-sung. Or Kim Il-un, whatever the hell his name is. I can't think of the guy's name. But the problem, of course, comes to where, okay, what happens if he does attack? Do we respond in kind? And if we do respond in kind, what does China do? If they hit us with nukes, let's say the North Koreans find a missile that can actually hit the United States mainland, and they were to nuke Seattle. Okay? How do we respond? Do we nuke Pyongyang? What do we do? If we nuke the capital of North Korea, do you think China's going to go along with that? You killed a bunch of innocent North Koreans. You killed people that are part of this nation is allied with their nation. And that's the problem. How does China respond in all of this? And this is where Donald Trump really needs to understand the nuances and subtleties of diplomacy. There are two ways that this could be played out to where the United States could get rid of Kim Il-sung, or Kim Il-un, whatever the hell his name is, and manage to not provoke the Chinese into a bigger war. First of all, convincing China that all the intent is to get rid of him, to not overthrow the North Korean government, and it basically convinced China to stay out of the war, basically. That we have no intent of overthrowing North Korea or anything like that. It would be a hard sell, but I think they could do it. The second is to actively convince China to help, which would be a lot harder. But it could probably work the best of all the solutions, because it would basically mean China's invading North Korea to take over the government. They overthrow the government. They install their own little puppet regime, with the deal being, if they do that, the war is formally declared over. There's an armistice signed. There's a formal end of the war. The demilitarized zone is ended. And that's it. So, what happens now? What happens with North Korea? That is the $64,000 question, as the old saying goes. What will happen? Will have to remain to be seen. But there's a lot more I could talk about Trump, and I want to kind of end it with one last thing. There may come a point down the road where a lot of Republicans are going to have to ask themselves, especially if this Russia thing gets even worse and worse, and becomes more and more obvious that there was something going on between the Russian government and the Trump campaign, which I think there was. I don't know the full extent of it, and I don't know how much Trump actually knew about it directly. It's something that worries me because this hasn't really ever happened before in modern America. That a hostile foreign government actively interfered with an election to the extent that Russia may have very well done. Have we interfered? Of course, in other nations' elections. There are people who say, well, we're hypocrisy complaining about other nations messing in our election when we've done the same thing to others. You have a point. And I'll be the first to admit, we probably should not have interfered with those elections. It may have done us more harm than good. It probably has. But that's past and past. Past is prologue. We are living for right now. And right now we have a possibility that we may have a president who got elected thanks in either a small, medium, or large part to a government that is not necessarily favorable to the American cause. That should scare the hell out of you. It scares the hell out of me. Because how do we know for certain that the president has 100% interest in the American people and not maybe a little bit of interest in somebody else? And that's something that should trouble you. And why the president isn't answering these questions should trouble you. And why he is so vehemently denouncing anybody that brings this up should trouble you. So think about that. As for me, that's it for now. Hope you guys have a great rest of the evening and a great tomorrow and a great week ahead. For everybody here at RSN Studios, it's good night, good luck, and may the good news be yours.